So welcome. This is part two of the series of recordings I was putting together on VM Recovery Manager for HA. In this second session, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the different capabilities that the offering provides. So if you listened or watched part one, this is the environment that I'm actually playing with. What you'll notice is I've got that cases management instance up on the top right. I'm going to go ahead and log on to it, show you a number of things there. And then the point of this particular video is to do a demonstration of user initiated operations, the different capabilities that you get with this offering, and then unplanned outages. So how does the solution actually react and what's the behavior that you're going to expect? So if you recall from part one, I have two systems. I do have a combination of Power 8 and Power 9. So on the left hand side you see the S824, and on the right hand side you'll see the S922. And I've only got 3 managed VMs in the environment. There are several others that exist that you'll probably see as I'm demonstrating the environment. But we'll be playing with those guys. And again, in the center, you'll notice that those guys are clustered with the Power HA software, and they're also being managed by the cases instance up on the top right. So let me go ahead and change gears, get right into it, go right into the cases, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so as you can see, now I'm logged on to the actual cases management instance. So let me go ahead and run a few commands so you kind of see what the environment looks like via the CLI. So if I just simply do an OS level -s, you'll see that this is an AIX72 TL3 with Service Pack 3 installed. Cases Manager query version. I have the packages installed for the 1.3 release along with Service Pack 2 that came out in June. So this is the latest available code as of the time of this recording. And then let's LPP-L on cases.ui. You'll notice that I have the agent package, the common package, and the server. So effectively, this cases instance is not only giving me CLI control, but it's also giving me the GUI, and it's running the web server behind the scenes that I'm connecting to, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes. If I kind of start querying the rest of the environment, you'll see that I have a single HMC. And here's the HMC name. You see that it's managing 4 hosts. On the top, you see the S824 that's participating in our environment, and then the S922 on the bottom. The other 2 hosts are not part of our relationship. I can get details on each individual host. So you'll see the participating VIO servers in each one and some of the additional attributes. And then if I start going a little bit deeper, query host group, you'll notice that I named my construct Oracle VM underscore HG. The 2 participating hosts are the S922 and the S824. And one of the things that I did want to highlight is this setting, the restart policy. The default behavior in the event of a failure is for those VMs to get restarted automatically. So I could come in after the fact and modify that and set it simply to advisory mode. But currently I'm just leaving the defaults so that if a failure does take place, my VMs will get restarted automatically. If I do a cases manager query VM, it by itself, it would go ahead and dump out every single VM in the system, whether it's managed or unmanaged. So I'm going to go ahead and grep it out and simply just show you the ones that that are managed in my environment. So even though there's probably approximately 60 VMs in the environment, I'm only managing 3 of them. You see them right there. And query VM, if I just do a VRM or a DB2, just the first one, you can go ahead and query the attributes for each of the individual virtual machines. So you see the different attributes. I did go ahead and modify the priority. I'll get into more detail on that particular piece in the more advanced recordings where I dive a little bit deeper in the fancy placement policies and different things that you can do with the solution. And you'll notice that the CLI does highlight the home host that I have designated for that particular VM. Let's go ahead and do a cases manager query app, and this is the view from the cases management LPAR. I do have the VM packages installed, or the VM monitoring packages installed inside of my VMs. So I have one where I'm exploiting the actual Oracle agent that's provided by the VMR software, and you'll notice that I called that particular app Aura underscore app. He is running on that particular VM, and currently he's in a yellow state. I do have him suspended on all the nodes. So again, I'll get into more detail in the more advanced recordings. And then I was testing with a custom application where I provided the start, stop, and the monitor logic, and it's the same thing. That one's running on one of my HA cluster members. He's in the yellow state simply because I've suspended him. But there are different states. You'll see a transition between green if everything's good, yellow if it's experienced a failure, and red if it actually detects that there is a problem, so it knows that it needs to do a restart. So let me go ahead and transition back. I'm going to go ahead and start showing you the different operations logically, and then I'll get into the GUI and I'll start performing the user-initiated operations. So here I just wanted to show you the logical diagram of the environment once again and show you what we're actually going to be doing when we enter the GUI. So in the center you see the construct of the host group, you see the 3 managed VMs and the fact that the 2 green ones are part of an HA cluster. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you an LPM host evacuation where only the managed VMs get moved from one side to the other side. So I'm going to perform that operation at the host level, and what you'll see is those VMs will get relocated dynamically just like you could do an LPM via Power VC or even through the HMC. And you'll notice that when I do that, all of the VMs will reside on the same exact host. Since I have a pair on the left, that's why I'm doing it from left to right. And then I'm going to go do an LPM return to the home host. So as I already highlighted, the VMs will have a designated home host. So I can say, hey, go ahead and return back. And when that occurs, it'll go ahead and dynamically move the VMs back to the original source. There is also another option that allows you to restart the VMs. This is the option that I mentioned does not require the simplified remote restart attribute to actually be set. So for example, if I went ahead and I powered down those VMs, in a scenario where I have more than 2 hosts, I could go ahead and say, I want to go ahead and restart the VM onto a new host, and it would go ahead and relocate them onto the next designated machine, and it would go ahead and clean them up off of the source. So I don't have to have SRR enabled, and I can show you when I launch the HMC for one of the VMs that I do not have that setting enabled on purpose. So let's go ahead and get into the GUI now. So you can see that I've got a window into the GUI up on top, and then I've got a shell into the actual cases management LPAR on the bottom. So on the bottom, I simply wanted to show you one of the things that you can do to check where your VMs are actually going to wind up. So if I do a cases manager query host so that I cache out my host names, they're rather long. I don't want to have to type them, so I just got them up so I can copy and paste. And I can do something like, for example, my S824, if I expand him, currently he's got that VRM VM, and then he's also got my first cluster member. They do, both of them have the designated host as far as the home host definition. If I just show you real quick, they're both set to the S824 being the home host. But let's say that I had to perform maintenance, and I know that there's a lot of unmanaged VMs in my environment, but I could go ahead and execute a migration and say, go ahead and take all of those managed VMs over to the next host, or to the host within the 12 host grouping. So I can do this. I can do a cases manager report system relocation plan, and I can do it at the host level. So I can say, hey, all of those managed VMs, where are they going to wind up? And my configuration is pretty simple. I've only got 2 hosts, so I've only got 1 potential viable target. But the nice thing is that it would go ahead and tell me here, the first VM is going to go ahead and wind up on the S922. The next one is going to wind up on the S822 as well, and so forth and so forth. So if the 30 VMs that I had in each of the systems were all being managed and I wanted to evacuate, I could have those VMs get displaced across a number of systems if I had more hosts within my host group. So let me go ahead and execute the operation here. I'll show you a couple quick things, and what I'll probably do is I'll fast forward just so that we don't waste time. So let's go ahead and migrate to the next host. We'll leverage the LPM function. I've only got 1 potential viable target, and I'll go ahead and I'll execute it. And now I really don't need to see the bottom anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And I already had a window open into the HMC, so I can go ahead and see, for example, here I have the first HA node. He does reside on the S824. The second one right beneath it resides on the S922. And then if I just do a quick query for the VRM, that one is also currently in the SA24 per the HMC. And if you take a look, you'll see that these guys are going to start getting migrated. So let's go ahead and go to the PHA, and you'll see that the first one already it created a second definition. It's starting to go ahead and copy the definition and the memory pages across to the S922. And from the cases side of the house, you notice that this new activities line on the bottom. So let me go ahead and expand that. And you can see that it'll start telling you the progress of the LPM operation. And this is the part that I said I'll probably go ahead and fast forward a little bit. And from what you can see, it just did a refresh of the screen. It rebuilt the topology. And if I now expand the S922, you'll see that the VRM LPAR went ahead and moved over. Node 2 was already there, and then MHPHA Node 1 is also stacked over there as well. So I effectively did a host evacuation. All of my VMs now reside on the target host. And because of that home host definition that I had, I can now say, I want to go back to the way that I was. So my maintenance is complete. I can say migrate back to home host, and all the VMs that don't belong on this particular host will go ahead and return back. Okay, so now that we see the VMs here, let me go ahead and collapse this, select on the S824, and I want the VMs to return back home. So I want to get put back in the state that I was in before. And if I expand the activity log, now you'll see that it's trying to restore the VMs back to the way that they were. And here you see that the operation actually completed. If I go ahead and I look back at the S824, my VMs did go ahead and return back to their original home host. So you see the VRM and the MH PHA node 1, and then you'll see that on the S922, I only have, hang on a second, if I can actually expand it, you'll see that I only have that one managed VM residing on that host. Now I'm going to go ahead and change gears, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down one of the VMs on the S824, and I'm going to bring it down for a reason. I want to show you while it's in the actual offline state. So think of a scenario where maybe I don't have the automated restart of the VMs, so I'm set in advisory mode. I get a notification, and maybe I want to go ahead and manually restart the VMs. Now, I purposely did not go ahead and enable the simplified remote restart attribute for my VMs. And you can see that if I go ahead and I click onto one of them on the bottom on the HMC, you'll see that the simplified remote restart flag is actually not set. Even though I'm LPM capable, I purposely elected not to go ahead and enable that setting. So I'm going to go ahead and shut them down, and then after I'm shut down, I'll go ahead and I'll do the other operation where if I expand it, I'll go ahead and I'll restart it and bring it online in a new host. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that I went ahead and I shut down that MHPHA node 1. It's currently showing up as being not activated. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that he currently resides on the S824 machine. If I go to the cases controller up on top, I wanted to go ahead and show you it reflects the fact that the partition's not activated, and what I wanted to do is paint a scenario where maybe the VM has failed. You don't have it set to automatically restart, and you do have the capability to perform the remote restart operation onto a new host via the cases interface, whether it's via CLI or via the GUI. So if I go ahead and launch the option, I can go ahead and restart that VM and bring it online on a new host. As you already know, my host group only has 2 machines, so I'm going to go ahead and select the option to go ahead and restart him since he's not activated. I'll select the S922, and then I'll go ahead and tee off the operation. Like I did before, I'll go ahead and I'll fast forward, and when it comes back online, I'll kind of show you how I can restore it back and what it's reflected from the user interface. Okay, and like in the earlier test, The screen went ahead and refreshed automatically. If I go ahead and I expand the S922, you'll see that the MHPHA node 1 is now showing up as running. Also in the HMC, you saw how it created the VM profile on the target machine. It went ahead and cleaned it up off of the SA24, and if you look on the right hand side on the bottom, you'll see that the MHPHA node 1 is now actively running on the S922. Now, to go ahead and go back home, I realized that I'm not doing this test at actual scale. I'm only using one virtual machine, but I'm just going to go ahead and select the option and put it back to the way that it was by simply saying I want to migrate back to my home host. We already know that LPAR, his home host is the S824, so I want to restore things back to the way that they were. I don't have to initiate the restart operation like I did. I don't want it to shut it down and bring it online. I want to dynamically move it back. So let me go ahead and do that now, and then we'll continue with the unplanned tests. And you can see that the operation completed, and the machine MHPHA node 1 was just now restored back to the SA24. Okay, so now that I went back and I put things back to the way that they were, what I want to go ahead and do is do the testing where I have a simulation for an unplanned outage. So for example, if I were to do host failure, I'd be bringing down the entire system, right? So in order to do that, I'd have to basically affect every single one of the partitions, and since I'm only playing with a handful, I'm not going to go ahead and perform that test. But just know that when you enable this type of configuration, if the system actually took a failure or a hit, only the managed VMs are the ones that the cases management LPAR would go ahead and restart on the next available host, right? So they'd go ahead and move across automatically. Notice that I'm signifying that I still have the potential clustering in place regardless of what it may actually be running. And then the next failure scenario would be a VM level failure. In order for us to detect if a VM level failure took effect and we tried to restart that VM, whether it's locally or on the remote host, I'd have to go ahead and install the agent package. And we have them for AIX, which is the instances that I'm playing with, and we also have them for RHEL and SLES. I took it a step further, and rather than just doing the VM failure detection, I also want to go ahead and monitor for application failures. So that agent package will let me go ahead and do double duty. And where I took it a step further is on one of my LPARs, I went ahead and I configured the application monitor specific to Oracle that was provided by the software. And then on the second one, I went ahead and I created a custom application monitor. So I'll kind of do my test in a double sense. I'm going to go ahead and exploit the fact that I have the agent installed to detect that there's a failure. But first I want to detect if the application's online or not. And I wanted to go ahead and restart the application instead of relocating the VM. And then I'll go ahead and I'll leave it where it's not able to restart the application cleanly, and it does go ahead and relocates the VM. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what you'll see that I actually have pulled up now is I have Windows onto one of my LPARs, MHPHA node 1, and I have one on the top and one on the bottom. I want to show you a couple quick things. Since I have the agent installed there, if I go ahead and I grep for the cases installation package, you'll see that that vmmon.rte package is actually installed, so it took only a few seconds to go ahead and in place. And what it does is it automatically starts up that daemon process that allows us to do the handshaking from the cases management LPAR. So if I grep for VMM, you'll see that the daemon's actually active. And then what I needed to do, if I go to the cases management instance, I click on my MHPHA node 1, and I go under policies, and I talked to this a little bit earlier for the VM level management. That HA monitoring setting up on the top right hand side does have to be set to enabled. I can do it via CLI or via the GUI. If I did it via the GUI, I would go ahead and click on update policies and run a discovery and verification again. That will let me accommodate for a VM level failure. And where I went ahead and I took it a little step further is I came in to that same instance and I created my own application construct. So I provided application start logic, stop logic, and monitor logic. And if I go into user local HA scripts. I went ahead and I created my own directory for a custom application. And if you just kind of take a peek, I define my own application monitor, my own application startup script, and my own application stop script. And all that I am effectively doing is I am creating a process called app1. So he shows up in my process table every time he gets his own new ID, but effectively my monitor is checking for the fact that that process exists. So I kept it super simple. What I've got as far as that actual monitor is I can do a cases. Notice that this command is actually different. So when I'm on the client itself, I can do a cases VMM manager. If I do a query app, I did go ahead and create an application called custom app. He is pointing, as you can see, to my scripts. So it points to my monitor script, my stop script, and then my application start script. And I'll create a separate recording where I cover this in more detail as far as the actual setup. But the things that I just simply wanted to highlight: by default, the monitor period is every 30 seconds. And then I did make a couple changes, and I did want to highlight those. The max restart, I don't want it to try to restart the application more than the default of the three. Actually, I wanted to restart the application only once. By default, it will go ahead and try to set it to 3. So I did go ahead and make that modification. And then in the event that it detects a failure and it's unable to restart it on its own, I do want it to go ahead and try to restart the VM, whether it's on the local host or whether it's on the next available host. So the other change that I made is I set this option, critical equals yes. That is also not set by default. The last piece that I'll highlight as far as my application definition is since it is automatically set to start up whenever the system boots up, if it starts things up cleanly, it'll be in a green state. If it detects a failure, it'll go ahead and change to yellow. And then if it experiences a failure, it'll go ahead and change to red. And up on the top right, I'm showing you that same exact custom app, but just via the GUI. And notice that my max restarts is set to 1 and that the status is currently green. So it is actively running. And rather than just show you that the process is just there, I mean, I can do a cases VMM manager status app, and it tells you that it's green. It doesn't show you all the attributes, but I basically have my own log file that I defined. And if I do my little wrapper script, you can see that every 30 seconds it's going to go ahead and confirm that the application is actually running. So without getting into the actual logic, I can go ahead and show you that my process is running. Custom app 1, you know that the process is there, but what happens if my process dies? So what I've got defined inside of my actual application monitor script is to check to see if it's actively running, and if it does disappear, it automatically restarts the application for me. So I'll go ahead and I'll kill it, and what you'll notice up on the top is that within the 30-second window, it's going to go ahead and detect that it's actually not there. So it should give me a report on that piece, and then since I set it to automatically restart, it'll go ahead and bring it back online for me automatically. So notice if you look on the top window, it says custom app 1 is offline. It goes ahead and invokes my script to restart it. It starts it, and then within the next 30 seconds, it's going to go ahead and report again that it's actually actively running. So it's as simple as that. I can show you the logic inside of the monitor script. So all I'm simply doing is just pushing the logic out to my own custom file where the wrapper script actually reports on that custom app log, and then checking for the status. If it does actually detect that the process is actually online, it tells me that it's running. If it does not, on the bottom you see that I say that I'm restarting it and I invoke my application start script. So it's just a little loop. Now, if I take it a step further, I wanted to go ahead and do something automatically if it experiences a failure and it's not able to cleanly restart up the application. So if I come in and I purposely left myself a little bit of a place where I can come in and say, let's go ahead and return an exit 1. So every time you check, even though the process is actually there, it's going to start checking for the application status, but it's going to report a 1. It's not going to be able to confirm that it's actually actively there. So what you'll notice, if you look on the bottom right, my node 1 is currently actively running on the S824. So I've got a window open to the HMC, and it's going to go ahead and check a handful of times, and you'll see the checking app status again. So I may just kind of fast forward just a little bit so that you see that it checks multiple times. Each time it's 30-second interval. And eventually it's going to get to the point that it's going to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and try to stop the app myself and restart it. And then if it's still unable to report the fact that it's actually online, it's going to go ahead and restart the VM, which is the behavior that I want. So if you wanted to compare this to a clustered solution, typically, let's say you took a PowerHA cluster, the default failure detection rate is 30 seconds. After that expires and he confirms that he needs to go ahead and initiate the move, he'll start acquiring on the second side and you're good to go. Here it's going to check multiple times. So by default it sets the monitor interval to 30 seconds. It needs to experience that failure multiple times. It's going to get to the point that it tries to restart the app, and then it tries to restart the VM. What you'll notice is, since I'm not going to go ahead and clean up that script, it's going to try to restart the VM locally. After it comes back online onto the same host on the S824, he's going to detect that the app's still not able to come online, and then he's going to try to restart it on the next available host on the S922. So while it is hands off, it is going to take slightly longer than it would had I had the application actually fully clustered. So I just wanted to draw that comparison to an actual clustered solution. The other behavior that I can show you while it's still checking up on top, if I do cases VMM manager queue on VMM, you'll notice that there's a reboot app start type. The default is set to VMM. You could go ahead and alter that to actually OS, where the application is not automatically restarted by the mere fact that the VM is restarted. You could have it restarted from the OS side of the house, and then the VMM process will go ahead and do the monitoring after the fact. So that's just an alternate view. Let's go back to the top. It should be getting to the last time that it checks the app status. So I believe it tries up to 6 times, and then it actually ran a stop on its own. Notice that it tried to stop it, restart it, and it's going to wind up leveraging the same exact application monitor script. So it's going to go ahead and come out with a result of exit 1, and then that's where you'll see it start taking automated actions. And if you had watched on the bottom right, I was waiting for the reference codes so that it got to the point that it actually booted up the OS. All the processes got restarted automatically. And let me just do one more quick cases manager status app. It's yellow. It did experience a failure. And just for quickness sake, it did go ahead and try to start up the app. It's checking the status, and it is going to go ahead and detect the fact that, hey, I'm still getting an exit 1. So it is going to go ahead and try to relocate the VM now to the next available host. And if you look at the bottom right, it tried. It was unsuccessful. Right now, the LPAR is no longer activated, and it should go ahead and automatically try to restart him. And you can see the definition popped up on the S922. So it's recreating the VM on the next available host. It's going to go ahead and automatically boot him up. And then I'll try to catch it when it comes online on the next available host, remove that exit 1 so that he leaves it up and running on the S922. And you probably saw me trying to restart the VM or restart the session. The SSH was getting denied because the VM wasn't all the way up. It just literally let me back in, and now it should be performing the clean automatically. So on the bottom right on the HMC, you'll see that the second definition on the previously S824 just literally disappeared. Let me go ahead. Local HA scripts. And I'm going to go ahead and VI my monitor script. And I'll simply stop it from failing. And I'll restart my top session. And what you'll see is now my 30-second checks should be confirming that the application's actually actively running. So I'm just waiting it out so you start seeing the messages. There's the first check. It is validated that the process is actually actively running. And then status app. You'll notice that everything is back to green. So it automatically kind of stabilized. The view on the GUI up on the top right will also correct itself. So the VM will go ahead and come out of that critical state. And everything should go back to being in a green status. And you'll notice that I just kind of clicked just so that it did a refresh on its own. Everything should be back online again. It's in a green status. My VM is now restarted on the S922. Everything is properly running as far as the application goes. And whenever I'm ready to go ahead and move that VM back to the original S824, I can go ahead and perform my move back dynamically by just simply saying, bring me back to my home host. So that wraps up the unplanned outage simulation, and then I'll give you my closing thoughts. All right, so to wrap things up, I wanted to thank you for sticking around. Hopefully you learned something. I did also want to show you that I had made a couple modifications in addition to what I mentioned throughout the recording. So LSR, SRC. I've got a window open into the cases management LPAR, and one of the default behaviors is for this VM max restart count. When it tried to restart the VM, you saw it try to restart them on the S824 once. The default behavior is 3, so I did go ahead and make that modification just to make you aware. That is different than the cases. Let me see, VMM manager, query app. The setting that I had also manipulated on the LPAR itself. So if you look, I have a window on the bottom to the MHPHA node 1, and that max restart, the default is 3. I did go ahead and modify them to 1. So note that I made those 2 changes. The final change that I did discover is kind of important. If we take a quick look at the sys0 attribute, notice that I have my cloud dev settings set to 1 and my ghost dev settings set to 1. To 0. And by default, this was a Power VC deploy, so the cloud dev setting, when it was actually set to 1 and I was doing the automated restarts from system to system, it completely rebuilds the system. So I'll lose my networking, my host name. So just be aware of that. Check it inside of the LPARs themselves if you're going to be deploying this type of configuration. Again, hopefully you learned something and you see the value add that the solution brings and how it differs from some of the other existing offerings that we have out there, by the mere fact that a lot of other offerings just provide the host level detection and restarts. We take it a step further where we can detect if an individual VM fails and we can restart just that VM, or we can also provide the framework for the application level monitoring, where if we detect a failure there, we can go ahead and try to restart it locally or try to restart it onto another host without having to have that application actually fully clustered with multiple VMs managing the application. So again, thanks for listening, and hope to catch you in a future recording.